Welcome, everyone. We are now in the Fireside chat between Krishna Gade, CEO and co-founder of Fiddler, and Weights and Biases CEO Lukas Biewald. They are going to discuss industry trends, customer buying patterns, and how the AI world is shaping up around ML and LLMs. And it definitely is shaping up with something new every day. So this should be pretty fun. Krishna, over to you.
Thanks, Katie. Hey, Lukas. Thanks for coming to this fireside chat. I think I'd love to give an intro to Lukas. Lukas has been pioneering this, state of ML. We both were working on search many years ago, and funny story is I had the great opportunity to join his team when he was building a natural language search engine back, almost many years ago, 15, 16 years ago. It didn't happen for whatever reason, but, essentially, I followed his career. He sort of went on to do great things, with Cloudflower and now Weights and Biases. Lukas, very nice to have you on our summit. We're excited for our conversation.
Thanks, Krishna.
Awesome. So I guess, Lukas, this talk of the town is generative AI. We had several things happen this week, AI safety, executive order, the OpenAI demo day. Let's start from the beginning, right? So, what do you think you're seeing as some of the promising areas where, your customers or in general, you're talking to or applying generative AI, and right now and also in the future?
Sure. I mean, it's the future is so hard to predict. And even, kind of getting a handle on what's happening right now is often, a challenge, for us here at Weights and Biases. But I think that, the use cases that we see working today that we expect to see, a lot more of in the near future, I think comes down to like search and summarization. I mean, those are the things that seem to work like just phenomenally better than in the past, right? So we see a lot of our customers, kind of building, essentially like chat interfaces to their documentation. In fact, we've done that internally at Weights and Biases, and it works really great. So you can go to a Discord channel and actually just chat with a bot that's pulling up docs, and also internally we use it to summarize feedback from our customers and GitHub issues that come in. And so I think there's a whole slew of summarization use cases in a business context that works super well. I mean, it's also pretty noticeable how well generative AI works for writing code. I mean, I use Copilot all the time. I put tons of questions into GPT, as I run into issues. So clearly that's a case that works. That works super well, and I think a lot of people have switched to it. So, those are the big ones. But I mean, there's so many creative uses out there that kind of unclear what's going to really take off.
Yeah. So like search, chatbots, summarization seem to be top of mind. Yeah. Agree.
Is that that's the same stuff you see, or do you think I missed?
Yeah, I think it is. It's similar. People want to do internal, documentation searches. Customer support is something that we see quite often. So I guess there are also some shortcomings with LLMs, right? And it's all not hunky dory. I mean, obviously, it's amazing technology. What do you think you seeing? When you talk to your enterprise clients, what are some of the things that you have experienced yourselves in terms of shortcomings of LLMs today, and how do you think we need to address that?
Sure. Well, I will say, the people that are least excited about LLMs that I talk to are execs at bigger tech forward companies. And I think the biggest issue that they're worried about is how hard it is to deploy these LLMs at massive scale. So, I think in terms of deploying it at small scale or deploying it in offline mode, I think that works not a problem at all. I mean, I think you can run GPT, you can run, I mean, these days you can run Llama 2 or Mistral, whatever on your laptop. I do. But I think that actually making this work at sort of the internet scale, I think is pretty challenging. I mean, I feel like OpenAI has done it, but hard to really argue. I mean, maybe Bard, maybe the Azure, like there's a little bit of this, but it's really, really difficult. And so I think like there, I think you see like a lot of kind of fear where I think a lot of execs of these companies are saying like, my CEO is like, okay, this changes everything, but I'm sort of responsible for making it happen. And I think that there's not a clear path to that. And this stuff demos phenomenally well, but every time you try to make this actually work and actually handle, all the cases that are meaningful, it's way harder and it's kind of unclear what to do, especially if you're using like an off-the-shelf model. Like, like now you can fine tune, but that's a little challenging, unclear how often that, really works. And so it's easy to kind of get stuck and not know how to actually, get these things deployed. And I think it's also, we're still learning what use cases really work and don't work. So, again, I think like people get frustrated because these generative models can't solve literally every business problem that they have. And that bar is just ludicrously high.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, there's like an interesting play between the FOMO from the CEOs to deploy generative AI and the FOMO, what we call the fear of messing up, the execs, as you just described, that something bad will happen, right? I think let's dive into this a little deeper, right? Let's say if an enterprise is thinking about seriously developing and deploying LLM applications, what are some of the common pitfalls that they can avoid? How do they go about it?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is, how do you handle the cases where the LLM doesn't work perfectly, right? And that's very, very product dependent, right? But I think if you look at, the places where this stuff, kind of works well, like search is a great example where, if you don't get the answer as the top result, you know what I mean? Like there's a second result, you can look at a third result, and we're okay with search only working 80, 90% of the time, right? And so those applications can be important, but if you have like a way to handle the cases where it doesn't work perfectly, it's going to be so much easier, so much more feasible to deploy it right now, because it's very unclear what the true accuracy of these models are in lots of different applications. In fact, it's even unclear how you should be measuring accuracy. I'll give you an example. Like we have an internal chatbot, and we think about like, okay, like is it returning like a useful document to you, right? You want that to be higher, obviously, but then we also occasionally it hallucinates information, right? And that's like a lot worse. Like, I mean, there's nothing worse than like wrong documentation, that you get. And so you have to kind of figure out like, okay, how much to punish that. And as you try to pull up recall, you can also pull up hallucination at the same time. So even like, what's the right metric here that you want to be optimizing for a good customer experience is really important. And what I always say is get something lightweight working end to end first, and then iterate on it. Versus, I feel like a lot of teams have this instinct to sort of like nail each step of the process, and then you get to the end, and you have something that's unusable.
Yep. And there's a matrix of choices here, right? There is prompt engineering, there is RAG, there is fine tuning, there's building your own LLM. And then there is like use cases we talked about, the internal, external, search, chatbot. Are you seeing like a marriage between these things, and you talked about starting small and getting to it. What is like a good baby step to get started? Like you mentioned you created your own internal chatbot, like how did you go about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, a great place to start is taking, GPT, even GPT 3.5, and just using it. And I think if you can do that, that's a very, very lightweight, place to start. And you can literally just try it in the chat interface and get a flavor for, how well things are working. Now, there's cases where you can't do that.
Yeah.
And in those cases, you're going to want to use, maybe Llama or Mistral. And I feel like every day that gets easier. So I think it's like, it's actually not that hard to stand this stuff up, but it does take an engineer, and it does take, like some effort. And now, like, I think RAG is kind of orthogonal to that, right? So if you have a knowledge base of any significant size that you want to be like searching over, I think you have to use RAG, right? I think like fine tuning is not going to get you, the accuracy you need. If you need to feed in specific information, that's not going to be available to like a, GPT models or anything that's like in the uncrawlable web, or that it didn't crawl, or, it's like created in the last 12 months, RAG is you have to do. Also, I don't think it's that hard. I think it's like a new skill, but a lot of people are learning it. A lot of options. I mean, now even OpenAI will do it for you. So, I think that's another good thing to do. And also, we're seeing more and more fine tuning, and I expect to see even more of that, because I think used to be hard to fine tune, and QLoRa came along, which made it a lot more feasible. Like now you can fine tune on a single GPU in most cases, and now OpenAI even makes it like trivial. Anyscale has an offering to make it trivial. I mean, it really is just like adding examples into these models through an API. And our experience is that basically always helps you. And so for any application where you care about accuracy, why not fine tune it on examples that you have? I think like sort of like prompt engineering versus fine tuning versus RAG. It's like, well, you should do all the things that you need to get the quality you want. But of course, the simplest thing to do is just try GPT-4 and or 3.5. Why not start there and then kind of iteratively add these pieces as you want to improve the accuracy.
Yeah. One of the things that teams are also fighting with, along with where to start, is like, what skills do they need to have, right? And now we are talking to companies that, don't have a lot of machine learning folks. And even if they have, maybe they have data scientists probably trained on the old school ML. What are you seeing from a skills perspective? How, as they get started, do you think generative AI has, made the landscape like, sort of easy for software engineers to make the transition and become like AI application developers? How are you seeing this in your side?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, don't you think so? I mean, I think obviously, weights and biases, started off as a product for, machine learning experts.
Exactly.
So we love machine learning experts. And if you want to train your own LLM, we love that. Like we
Yeah.
totally support that. Should you train your own LLM? Probably not, right? I mean, there's like a lot of amazing models out there. I don't think you need a special, machine learning, education or experience to do fine tuning. I mean, fine tuning is pretty simple. You add, examples to your model. I mean, like you're kind of getting it to run used to be hard, but now with Anyscale and OpenAI, it's not hard. And I think at that point, really, it's just sort of like you need to have the machine learning mindset, right? Which is different than software engineering in the sense that you have to really look at lots of examples. You have to be rigorous about evaluating the quality of your stuff. I think that is actually pretty different than coding. But I think a data scientist, a software engineer, if you can hook up the API, you can measure and iterate. You know what? That's really all you need, I think, to make these models work. I don't know if you agree with that, Krishna.
Absolutely. I think, the landscape has become very flat, right? I think the knowledge gap is reduced, and, in so many ways, the APIs that the models have, you can get started with, traditional like software engineers can make the transition to be AI engineers much more quickly. So I guess like we touched on evaluation, right? That actually is one of the big problems. We both worked on search before, and in many ways, I kind of liken the LLMs to be like a search engine type of problem where you have an open-ended question coming at you and you provide an answer. You don't know if your search engine provided the right answer or not, and you rely on different ways to assess its performance. But now it's much more complicated because everyone is building a search engine in some ways, now thousands of organizations. So it's, how do you handle this? So like, how do organizations approach evaluation and measurement, to make sure that their LLM experiments?
There's how organizations do it and how they should do it, in my opinion. And, I guess I'll tell you both here, right? So, I've talked to a lot of people about this over the last couple months. And I've talked to, some CEOs of large companies that you probably have used their products who tell me that the way that they test their generative AI is literally by vibes, testing by vibes. I've heard that more than once, actually, is like that line, like testing by vibes, which you wouldn't do that with your software. You probably shouldn't do it with LLMs, especially when you put it like that, like kind of obviously, right? But, it kind of points out that testing is hard. But when you set up a good testing infrastructure, now you can systematically improve what you're doing. So, I was talking to, I hope he doesn't mind, CEO of Case Text, which sold to, Thomson Reuters a few months ago. And actually, this is like a really great example of like a legal use case. And he had a very, very sophisticated, setup around testing at lots of different scales. So like, kind of quick tests that people could use with the prompt engineering, and then sort of like longer and slower, more expensive tests that they would like gradually do before they put, something into production. I think that's actually a lot of the value that they built there, and a lot of why they sold for I think $650 million, right? It was like they set up a really good testing harness, and what that let them do was gradually improve the prompt engineering. And I think all of their stuff, all of their IP was prompt engineering on top of GPT, but they got it really good because they had really good evaluation. That tells you right there, you really should be thoughtful about the evaluation. And I think you want like kind of different scales of evaluation, and it really depends on the application, but a very common pattern is to do the first pass of evaluation with an LLM itself. And that might sound, counterintuitive that would work, right? Like, asking GPT to evaluate GPT, but in a lot of cases it does work. We've seen cases where that evaluation is really reliable, and we've seen cases where it's really unreliable, at least compared to human evaluation, if you could still call it the gold standard. Maybe not anymore. But yeah, I think it really, that depends on the use case. But I think that the thing that's common across like all use cases is that you really should be taking evaluation seriously so that where things are improving. And I found it with prompt engineering, I don't know about you, Krishna, but like in my own limited experience with prompt engineering, I've been surprised at how prompt improvements that really seem like they should improve things make it worse. And you wouldn't know that if you didn't have like a reasonable set of data to test it against.
Absolutely. I think the model graded evaluation is definitely something that we are seeing emerge, because I think it's literally not scalable, to have like a human rating system available that can judge every response, every nuanced question. And so this is not a scalable thing. And I think that's the way forward, it seems like. And definitely prompt engineering is engineering the prompts and supplying the context. You can navigate the LLM in base, and you can mitigate some of the performance issues that you might see. That's something that we're also seeing. Great. I mean, I think, who are listening, Lukas spent years building, human evals with Crowdflower and all. So if he's telling evaluation is important, you all should take it very seriously in your organization. So this is it's a very important topic. So maybe like, let's take a few questions from audience as well, Lukas. So I guess, like one of the things, this is basically like top of the mind for everyone related to evaluation. So many of new LLMs are dropping every month. How should people pick an LLM to commit to and deploy in their production pipeline? Very realistic question. And I have this question myself, what would you answer?
Well, I'll tell you what, I go on Twitter and I see like, what gets the most like retweets, and I go with that one.
The vibe.
The vibes, the vibes. I mean, I guess, I think that there's like a couple, kind of ones that like are sort of thought to be, the best for a lot of, applications. I think like Llama 2 was that, Llama 2 chat, Llama 2 instruct, and then, Mistral, came along, and I think there's evidence that's better. I think that this may change like day to day, which again is why you want like a good, testing harness set up. But it's not that hard to swap these things in and out, right? They have like basically the same API, all of them. I mean, you might want to change the prompt to match the way they did the RLHF, but I think that picking I think there's like a size of prompt that you care about, right? And that like, for some applications, the latency may matter there. If the smaller models will be easier to run, in an embedded context, will be easier to run on your laptop, they'll be cheaper to run. You can run, more of them if you care about, throughput. The way to look at it is like, what's the biggest model that you can get running on one GPU, or what's the biggest model that you actually are able to physically run on your computer?
Right.
I think like once you've picked the size, I think then, this is going to get out of date. If I was like watching a recording of this, I think the one that worked best for us, for our applications recently was Mistral, which actually was an improvement over the Llama 2 model that we've had. So we've kind of moved, to that for our own internal stuff. But I'm sure new stuff will come along. The thing is, though, it's actually not that hard to try a new one. So I don't like. I think it's okay to try different ones. I think Hugging Face can get a little complicated because there's just so many of these these models out there. But I think Mistral would not be a bad choice right now.
Yeah, I think, it seems like there are two kinds of LLM models that are there for like these large use cases, like, OpenAIs and Anthropics in one bucket, and the Llamas and Mistrals in one bucket. And I think people
Yeah.
are picking both in some cases for different use cases in their organization. So that's great. So,
Yep.
so I guess, like, another fundamental question that people have is like, okay, I want to get started on this LLM journey, but I want to collect my corpus. Collecting the corpus in enterprise is a challenge. How do I go about it? Any recommendations?
Well, that's so use case dependent. It's like really hard to answer that.
Yeah.
You know, generally, I think you need to.
It's more of a data problem.
Yeah. I mean, one thing, I'll tell you, like for one application, I asked GPT-4 to generate some, kind of relevant examples, and that honestly was like a pretty good start. So, I've actually heard of other people doing it. I did that myself. So, not a crazy, kind of way to get your first data set, but you really want a human loop in any product that you launch here, where the humans can give you feedback, and then you can get more data to feedback in and to your model, if at all possible.
So maybe a related question, touching upon the problem of testing and evaluation, right? For any test, like in software, you write unit tests and you create data sets for testing software. And, for this, you may want to have a lot of test prompts, for the questions that your chatbot needs to answer. How do customers can go about creating large test sets? Do you think that's a problem that, that one needs to solve in terms of testing LLMs?
For sure. And I think, like, you may want like multiple test sets. I think, like, I do think people get a little, well, I don't know. I don't want people to get like daunted, right? Like if you create like 100 test cases, that will actually tell you if the model's getting a lot better or a lot worse, right? So like, having, some kind of sane, size thing to start with is not necessarily, that is like much better than testing by vibes, which, obviously is like stay there for a lot of people.
Yeah. And so I guess this is also where I guess model graded evaluation could help, right? You could probably have models generate questions for you these days. Yeah. So
yeah, totally. Although, I will say, like, this might be going back to my crowdsource days a little bit, but there is really like an anti-pattern where some people like don't look at what their model is doing like hardly at all. I think like I would just say like forcing yourself to look at 100 cases of exactly what your model did. It's a really good idea that you'd be surprised how many people kind of skip that step. So labeling your own test cases is not, the worst thing to do.
So maybe slightly more like weights and biases related questions, right? You started the journey on experimentation of traditional ML and deep learning models. How have weights and biases evolved? What are some of the differences that you're noticing between experimentation of ML/DL into experimentation with LLMs?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just to brag a little bit, we feel like Mistral was built with weights and biases, as was Llama 2, as was, GPT. So all these things were actually built using weights and biases. That said, it doesn't necessarily follow that, if you're doing prompt engineering, on one of these models, you'd want to use the same product, but we really want you to, right? So, we've put in a lot of work to make, something called weights and biases prompts, right? Which is a prompt focused, offering where you can, see things like when you chain together multiple prompts, you can like, kind of trace through it and see what happened, and see how, your results compare to other situations. Also, fine tuning has gotten super popular in the last couple months. I mean, I think like, when Llama 2 came out, that was significantly better, I think, than the other big models that had been, open sourced prior to that.
Yeah.
And QLoRa made it a lot more feasible to fine tune models on your own hardware. And so, fine tuning is a lot like training a model where you want a lot of the same metrics. And so, at this point, I think fine tuning is the most common use of weights and biases. Yeah. I mean, the other thing that's interesting is like when we started weights and biases, I think deep learning worked super well for images and audio and actually biology and chemistry. And so, that was like the majority of our use cases was more this kind of rich media stuff. And I think lately we're seeing a big shift more towards text because so many of these applications like suddenly work so well on text. Although I think with the multimodal models, coming out that may rotate,
Yeah.
back again. But I think bottom line is a lot of new stuff works. And so, people do a lot more variety of stuff on top of weights and biases.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I was playing with DALL-E 2 the other night to create a cartoon, and like it was not following my instructions that well, where so it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I guess going into that hardware issue you just touched upon, right? There's like the large models and the small models today. And for ML teams in enterprise that may be GPU poor, maybe they don't have access to the 100s. And what is a good way to get started on it and still deliver a differentiated user experience?
Are you talking about using an LLM?
Using LLMs or getting LLMs deployed. Do you think if I don't have access to GPUs, I could still go ahead with Mistral or Llama 2 and productize something in my workflow?
Oh yeah, definitely. You can. There's some great open source projects out there like Llama CPP. And again, if you really, really care about latency, this could be a challenge for you. But I have no problem running. I can't run the 70 billion parameter model, but the smaller ones that are still enormous, right? It's 13 billion parameters, 6 billion parameters. Those run fine on my laptop and on my desktop. And I think people are I feel like people are a little overly focused on how hard it is to deploy these models, but they run fine on modern hardware.
Awesome. Great. I think, we are coming up on the clock. I think, this is a great conversation, Lukas. As you all have heard from Lukas, get started on this journey, start small, iterate your way towards the top, and, evaluation, don't forget about it. Try to make sure that you're testing your LLMs and sort of, I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to build some amazing apps. Thank you so much, Lukas, for spending time with us. We'll share this with you later, and good luck with everything that's going on in Weights and Biases.
Awesome. Thanks, Krishna. Great to talk.
Thank you.
Thanks, Krishna. Thanks, Lukas. That was a jam-packed session. Love the lots and lots of easy nuggets that we have, especially the how do organizations, how they actually do it and how they should do it. Testing with vibes, I think, Lukas, that's going to become a term that many people are going to start using now when they're training their sales teams or those who are external facing. Hey, watch out for that. And then the FOMO and the FOMO is in school as well. And then, as Krishna said, +1 with the take baby steps and try all the models out there and try the different methods across the different GPT models. So really nice learnings. We covered a lot in 30 minutes.